Hello again, it's Carol Anderson, welcoming you back to another introduction to the Met free streams. Tonight we're going to see a rebroadcast of a performance of Thomas Ades's surrealist opera, The Exterminating Angel. And I had the opportunity to see this in the theater live. It's really quite extraordinary and quite evocative. Really, I was really moved by it, but in a very uncomfortable way. And so it's based on a surrealist film. So if you feel strange and uncomfortable about what you're seeing, you should be. I think it's meant to make you quite uncomfortable. So the original film was named El Angel Exterminador, and it was a surrealist film created or produced in 1962, written and directed by Luis Buñuel. The film is described as sharply satirical and allegorical. It contains a view of the aristocracy, suggesting that they harbor savage instincts and unspeakable secrets, so that there's a dark side of the aristocracy that we see unfold as they're trapped. Basically, you have an aristocratic dinner party, and the servants inexplicably leave right before the dinner party starts, and only the guests are left in the house. And they have dinner. We start to see the strange things about their relationships. And then for some reason, they're unable to leave the house. And so they end up trapped there for several days. They become dying of thirst. All their worst things come out. At least one character dies in the course of it. And then there's a suicide pact. There's just a lot of crazy things happen in this. But it's meant to show that it is meant to show just even that the most elegant people have these deep, dark sides within. Roger Ebert, the famous film composer, critic, was quoted as saying, "The dinner guests represent the ruling class in Franco's Spain, having set a banquet table for themselves by defeating the workers in the Spanish Civil War. They sit down for a feast only to find it never ends. They're trapped in their own bourgeois cul-de-sac. Increasingly resentful at being shut off from the world outside, they grow mean and restless. Their worst tendencies are revealed." So that's the allegory that Roger Ebert saw and described from watching this film. Buñuel actually chose to not articulate the meaning of The Exterminating Angel. He said once, "The demand for explanations was itself a symptom of a bourgeois mentality." So as I said, in the film and in the opera, an aristocratic couple host a dinner party and no one can actually be able to leave. They're not obviously imprisoned, but they are in a way psychologically imprisoned. When the opera had its premiere at the Salzburg Festival in 2016, Thomas Adès explained that to him, the guests suddenly experienced an absence of will. What gets exterminated by some force, either internal or outside or both, is the will to act. And so that's where they're trapped and they're not able to make the choice to actually leave the dinner event. This is written for a huge orchestra. We have 3 winds in every section, plus they double on different instruments, like the third flute doubles on piccolo 2 and alto flute. The second doubles on piccolo 1 and bass flute. Those are really large flutes that have very interesting timbres to add to the flute section. The oboes have the typical doubling of the English horn, and we have contrabassoon. There's a piano in there, harp, guitar, and it kind of goes along, I guess, with the Spanish theme of it all. Strings actually at one point play 1/32 size violins, meaning, a regular violin, if it's this big, then we go half, quarter. They're tiny little violins, teeny tiny little violins, and it sounds like Psycho, that music. And it's meant to kind of create a very surreal and terrifying sound at that moment. One of the most interesting instruments is the onde martenot, which I'm kind of obsessed with. It is an early electronic instrument. It was invented by Maurice Martenot. And I'll describe it. It was actually patented the same year as another early electronic instrument, which you're probably familiar with, called the theremin, which is that sound in all of the science fiction movies from the 50s. So Jacques Martineau, or Maurice Martineau, was a cellist, and he had been a radio operator during World War I. He developed the onde Martineau in an attempt to replicate the accidental overlaps of tones between military radio oscillators. I'm not sure what that really means. But his idea, and he also wanted it to be as expressive as his instrument, the cello. So you'll hear onde Martineau in a number of pieces by Olivier Messiaen in particular, and it's also in Arthur Honegger's Joan of Arc at the stake. It actually shows up in this moment of this donkey. But it's a huge part in this moment, and the woman that plays the onde Martineau. There's only a few people in the world that play it, so whenever it's needed, they kind of travel around and they specialize in these unusual instruments. So you'll see some really great shots of the onde Martineau player, Cynthia. I can't remember her last name, but she deserves a bow. She's a hero. I obviously can't make an onde Martineau sound, but it's very eerie. You'll be like, what the heck is that sound? And then you'll realize that's what it is. And like I said, they have some great, there's some big instrumental interludes throughout the opera, and they have great camera work focusing on the orchestra and in particular on the onde Martineau player. So this opera is not only a huge orchestra, but it's a huge cast. There's, I think I counted 12 dinner guests, but I might be counting the butler in that. There were 22 named parts plus a chorus, which is most often off stage. One of the really interesting things in this is, and we don't really get to see it in the movie in the stream part, but it was part of the experience when you saw it in the Metropolitan Opera House. Sometimes modern works or modern interpretations of older works will have what we call a pre-show. And that's where a little bit of action, or sometimes a long period of action, takes place before the typical lights come down in the house, conductor enters, takes the bow, the tuning, and then the conductor enters. So pre-show can be all sorts of things, but we used it a lot in Santa Fe because there's not a curtain in that particular outdoor venue. And we had a little bit of a pre-show for a show that we did in Houston called Four Saints in Three Acts. And there was a gentleman who was hired to be an acrobat. And so he did sort of some acrobatic, very slow movement from acrobatic position to another. And that was the pre-show for that. So usually it's something the director creates or a choreographer creates, all in their vision of the show. But in this case, Thomas Adès actually wrote the pre-show into the work. And so you have, at the very beginning, you have about, it's under a minute, I think, when I do the math. It's just measures of chimes, and they're not rhythmic, they're marked by durations of seconds. So it says as the audience enters, you have the first set of chimes, and then they keep going, and then you have about 30, it changes about 30 seconds before the tuning, you have the second bit of chimes, and so on. And then there's actually when the third bell player enters, then the orchestra tuning is specifically notated when it needs to begin in the score. And then, so it's very specific and interesting. And there's sort of a transformation. And then the bells get more and more, they transform the rhythm, they become louder and louder until we finally have the entrance of Julio the Butler. And this is a confrontation. We see the butler and then the other servants as he says, "Where do you think you're going?" I said, "For a walk, I won't be long." And this is where the servants are all strangely mobilizing and leaving the house for a reason they don't really understand. So then there's a really interesting, and I'm not really sure what the meaning of this is. I suppose if I had done a really deep dive, I did a shallow dive, just a coral reef dive into this opera, not a Marianas Trench dive. But the first couple of events that happen in this first act repeat strangely. So we have first entry of the guests, and we have, and then that is actually a singer, is the coloratura soprano Leticia, and she has actually what is said to be, and they marketed the heck out of this, the highest note ever sung at the Met, which is this high A, which is the A above middle C. So it's ha 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 ha. And you hear that. That's kind of that motive kind of is crunching in, and it's sort of the guests coming in and the walls kind of closing in on them, although they don't realize it at this point. It's kind of an interesting way to do it. And then we have servants leaving, and they flee, and then we have a second entry of the guests, and that action all begins again, and it's quite a little bit slower. It says slightly slower than scene 3, first entry. Then we have Leticia. And so they have it twice. The same thing happens with a toast to the exquisite soprano. I think they're toasting. It's after an opera performance, and they're toasting. Leticia is the opera diva, and they're toasting her performance. Sorry, I have to go to a different score as I do this. And that is very strange that he has that same music twice. It's just in a little bit different. It's a note, a tone down the second time. So we have, to the exquisite evening our friend Leticia has given us tonight, with her stupendous performance as the Virgin Bride of Lammermoor. She just did Lucia di Lammermoor, so she's obviously a coloratura. Oh, I mean, it's a tenor. Crazy, nobody. We have that sort of. And the second time, it just goes a little bit down, and it's marked pianissimo. And the first time it says Nobile raises his glass of champagne. The second time it says puzzled. So Nobile stands for a second toast, and he's puzzled because he's like, oh, it's already something's going weird here. So we have. I got to jump ahead on the pages. Then they say Leticia, everybody toast Leticia. Then we have a little bit of witty banter, and then we have this thing again. To the exquisite evening, our friend Leticia has given us tonight. And that's the tenor he just covered 2 octaves, that one of the tenors in that moment. So no one quite understands why that happened twice, but it happened. And so then we go on and we have, apparently the ragu aria, which is about the dinner, when Lucia, who's the hostess, talks about the menu. So, moving on with moments, there's one of the couples that's there is a conductor who's married to a pianist, Blanca, and there's a piano as part of the set, so she's supposed to play. I don't know that it's coming out the pit, and she's just mimicking it. It actually says piano 4 hands and pit, so it's even harder than any one person could have done. And then it gets a little bit crazy. So it doesn't actually have anything to do with what's going on, because they say, right at that moment, they're saying there was an ashtray and it gets thrown through a window. Leticia throws it through, and he said, what was that? An anarchist? No, it was Leticia, our Valkyrie, which is funny that she calls her a Valkyrie because she just sang Lucia. So the anarchists, the anarchy kind of revolution starts happening outside of the house as we go. So we get some crazy moments. Several moments where Miss Blanca plays, but then this is interesting. This is the first moment that someone realizes something's going wrong, and this is the Colonel. He comes in, and he's in the cloakroom, and he's clearly canoodling with Miss Lucia, who is married to a different fellow. I can't remember her name of her husband. I could look at the cast list. It'll show up in a second. And that's where, and then Lucia says they're going to go very soon, and we'll be able to, wait for me, and we'll be able to have a little canoodling moment. And so the most lyrical music actually that happens throughout, and I'll play a little bit of something that happens in Act 3 later on, is the music of Eduardo and Beatriz, who are a young engaged couple, and they actually find themselves really quite lost in this. They have one of the worst reactions to this very strange situation that's happening. So let's move on a little bit. I know I'm doing a little bit of bouncing around from score to score. There's a really interesting moment where Julio, the butler who has left, crosses into this macabre world that is happening. And everyone tries to warn him not to come in because they're thinking, well, because they're starving and they're hoping he's coming in for breakfast. He's bringing in the coffee, if I recall. And Leticia says, no, she's just saying, don't come in, don't cross over. And some other characters, the Colonel and Monsieur Roque, are saying, what can a cup of coffee do? And then Lucia says, no, go ahead and come on in. And she introduces him in. And there's a moment where there's a huge C-sharp minor chord, and the Onde Martineau does this crazy bit. And I'll get to that. It's going to be a little bit approximate because they have this vamos, vamos. Everybody's doing this weird. It's like this vamos. Everyone's doing a seventh, but it's all different sevenths. So it's pretty cacophonous. I can't even play it because there's 12 of them singing at once. And that's when Leticia's saying, no. And then she says, Julio, don't cross over. What harm can a cup of coffee do? I'm playing that really fast, but that is, it's tritone. It's a tritone, and then a fifth, and then a tritone again. Remember, tritone is that really creepy interval, the devil's interval. And that is, the shape of that also kind of collapses in on itself, and that's when people are getting trapped. Again, that's that idea. Fifth, tritone. And so that's when, now we have, that's the two guys saying, what harm can a cup of coffee do? And then Lucia says, of course, Julio, come on through. Julio, please come through. Then Blanca. And that is a very odd moment because this is the Onde Martineau that comes in. There's a line missing. And you'll hear that a sound. And that's a huge moment when we realize that if you come in the door, you're also going to get trapped. So I want to jump ahead so I don't spend too much time on things. There's a really beautiful moment, actually, where Blanca is accompanying herself, and then she sings quite a lovely little tune that is in duet with the Onde Martineau. So we have, and she's accompanying herself, quote unquote, at the piano. And the text is, over the sea, where is the way? Birds tell me. I'll just play that much. And so you'll hear that it's in a canon where one starts and then the other. The Onde Martineau imitates the vocal line exactly. And then it does, the first line is over the sea. And the second one, because kind of reverses the second time she says over the sea or on islands of gold. So it does a little retrograde where you have, and then it goes exactly backwards. Inversion, actually, where it goes the opposite contour, the opposite melodic contour. Like if you go up, you go down and such. That's what I mean. That's inversion. It's opposed to retrograde, where it goes literally backwards. Getting very theoretical, aren't I? Then there's a really crazy moment. There's a lot of percussion in this opera, and there's a very strange moment, and I think this is in Act 3, when everything's really gone to pot. Everyone's they're starving at this moment. At one point, they have to pound through the wall to get to a water pipe so they can find, because they can't leave the room to even just go to get a drink of water or to get food. And so there is actually an ensemble called the Obsessive Compulsive Ballet. It says named guests, I'll explain it with his words, not mine, perform a repetitive tick in the notated rhythm with a given percussion instrument played in the orchestra while the doctor watches sadly. So for instance, Leticia squeezing a spot. I guess that is that on her face. And it says 2 spring coils. They go boing, boing. Then there's a steel drum for Lucia, who her action is a repetitive action, is washing in the puddle. And then Blanca has a hair loss issue that she's doing. So we have steel pans, I guess, and it says combing hair. Then another person, there's a guero, which is that sound. It's like a gourd with ridges on it, shaving leg with the blade of an axe. And then the lion's war instrument, tearing strip off shirt and stuffing into pipe. So it's very strange, very strange. There's Raoul has a washboard associated with his action, which is plucking nose hairs with finger and thumb. So there you go. So this is repetitive, and it's almost they almost call it a chacan, because it's based on this repetitive percussion and repetitive staging motions, which is chacan is like a sort of it has a ground bass, which is a repeated bass pattern. It's a Baroque form. And then there's changes over top of that. And over that, Blanca actually sings that she's hungry and she begs for a sugar cube. So it's a very peculiar moment. But this is as things are getting really wrong. Everyone's, their clothes at this point, their hair's like all mussed, their clothes, they haven't had bath for however long, it's just, it starts getting quite desperate before they can actually get out. So another interesting spot, films typically rely on dialogue and don't typically have a soliloquy that lends itself to an opera aria. An opera kind of needs those moments, and so our librettist, Tom Cairns, who worked along with Thomas Adès, Cairns is his last name. I think I got Tom mixed in there as I was typing quickly. They realized that this was kind of an issue for an opera, not to have an aria. So to create moments for arias, they added some poems from different poets. Chaim Bialik, Buñuel, the director himself, and there's a very poignant moment where a 12th century Jewish poet who finally reached the Israeli homeland. He was a Zionist, and he finally reached the Israeli homeland and then died tragically after that. His name is Yehuda Alevi, has a poem that becomes an aria for Leticia. And this is the aria that actually, it marks the moment that the guests are finally released from whatever has trapped them. So you have this kind of ostinato, it says like an avalanche. So there's this underlying da 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 that happens, and then she sings the poem. The poem is, "My home, do you ask of my peace? Who ask for yours? To reascend your mountains, bedew them with my tears. Press my face into your earth, kiss your soil and your rocks. I'd leave great Spain for one glimpse of your dust." And that's, of course, the poet's longing for his homeland of Israel, which, in the Jewish diaspora. That's one of those words that I think I've read a million times and never actually said. I'll look it up. Everyone, the Jews were just dispersed around the world, and so the ultimate goal, and that's what he's saying in this poem, is to go back to their homeland. And then she has these soaring lines above it, and this is just so we have these. Octave that she sings, it's all above the staff. The lowest note, there's a B here, but then it goes. So when she said I'd leave great Spain, and it actually goes on further that we get the finally, I am the wail of jackals, I am the violin for your songs. There are alternate notes, but the written notes are, and that's a B, which is a crazy high note. And I don't know if Audrey Luna, who is a ridiculously amazing, high-flying coloratura, she's done a lot of the music of Adès. Obviously, it takes the coloratura like plus to do this role because it's not just high, it's high all the time. And, it's just, so takes a really unique coloratura soprano, and she does it. I'm not sure if she sings the B or if she sings an Ossia note, but it ends on a potential high A, and again, I don't recall which octave she actually ended up singing it, but rest assured there will be plenty of high notes for you. The last thing I want to mention is that when the guests exit, they end up in a church, and we have text of the Requiem going, libera de, wait, what is the text? Libera de morte eterna, deliver us from eternal death, et lux eterna luceat, and eternal light shine upon them. And then it kind of devolves into the bells, which is how we started the evening. So, pretty extraordinary evening. I remember there's a terrifying moment, which I couldn't find in the piano score because I didn't have an orchestra score to look at, where the offstage percussion is just insane, and it's just, you're sitting there listening to it with this crazy ond martinos, and you're just kind of pushed back in your seat by the force of the dense and terrifying music that's being played. So I hope you find this fascinating as I did when I saw it in the theater. And, just enjoy this extraordinary piece, dense, surreal, insane, but incredibly well presented and well sung and full of variety. And there's some really quite sublime moments as well as the crazy ones. Thank you for joining me for yet another talk. I'm so glad that you are supporting Utah Opera by watching our digital content on YouTube or on Facebook. And please continue to do so. And we want to thank Judy Brady and Drew Browning, who are longtime members of the Utah Opera family, who are making these things possible. So I wish you all the best. Stay safe and continue to wash your hands 20 seconds every time. Don't forget. All right. See you next time.